Good afternoon, everybody. Today I'm going to be going over project management and supervision topics. I have had requests for the other director managerial level topics that are preparing reports and official documents and the strategic planning, fiscal analysis, management of budget and contracts. I don't have time to do a separate live stream about those, but I did find a lot of good resources. I'm going to be putting a post on nysits.org later that has some online courses that you can take to help with that and some good information about what types of things might be helpful to study for those areas. So I hope that helps some people who need those topics. The preparing reports and official documents is going to be, please look at the preparing written material live stream I already did for the IT Specialist 3 exams. It's in the playlist for the IT Specialist 3 exams, the grade 23. And also reviewing some grammar, usage, punctuation, sentence structure sort of rules. And then the strategic planning, fiscal analysis, management of budget and contracts. I have a lot of resources about, like from Division of Budget, about how purchasing works in the state, what's the difference between an RFP, RFQ, RFI, all of those lovely acronyms. Oh, good job, Captioner. Captioner got it perfectly correct. And I will post those for you guys later on the nysits.org site. But today's agenda is project management and supervision. So I'm going to be starting with a review of some other resources because I'm just giving a very high-level overview today of these topics. These are pretty big topics. So we're going to start with project management and then go on to supervision, administrative supervision, talk about what the difference between those is a little bit. But I am going to start with other resources. If you're taking the grade 25 exam, the IT Specialist 4 exam, the only topic that you would need here is supervising a project. So it'll just be the basics of project management. I'll go over exactly what the description is for what you should study in a little bit. The grade 27 exam, you will need the supervision and the project management. So everybody else needs supervision and project management, so you would need both parts. But if you're only taking the grade 25, you only need the supervising a project, so just the basics of project management. If you're only taking the grade 23 exam, the IT Specialist 3 exam, please click off of this video and on to the grade 23 playlist because none of this is pertinent for your exam. I mean, you can hang out with us if you want, but it's not the best use of your study time. So for project management, I recommend starting with a document that was put out by the Office for Technology before it became OITS, Office of IT Services. And that's Management's Guide to Project Success. That's the higher level primer, sort of, about project management that they put out on NYSITS website. Anything in this box to the side of me here is what the website looks like right now. I said start here, Management Guide to Project Success. I did take their PDF and I reprinted it on my computer. Like I just recompressed it because it went from like 18 meg or something down to 3 meg. So it's the same file, it's just smaller. And I also made a version that has 2 pages side by side for you. Like if you have an iPad or something and you like to read on that, it would be a lot easier to read the one that's landscape mode with the 2 pages side by side. And if you're printing, it would be much easier to print using a lot less paper. There's also a download that is the diagrams only. So that's going to be a good thing for you to maybe print out if you just want to take notes on that as you're reading the rest of it on digital. That might be useful for you too. If you have to do something beyond just the overview, there's a whole project management guidebook put out by New York State. And that's, again, from the Office for Technology, now OITS. And I did a couple things with this guidebook for you. What I did was I took each one of the sections and I smashed all of the chapters together into one download for each section. If you're just doing some of the more entry-level sort of project management stuff, so if you're in the Manager 1 Project Management Fundamentals area, that would probably be more of just section 1. If that, you might be able to get away with just looking at the Management Guide to Project Success that I said to start with. So this is going to go more in depth for you. I also put the entire thing together as one file so that you could download that if you wanted to. It is very large. It's over 700 pages. Please don't just go printing that all willy-nilly. It will use a lot of paper. There is also a 2-up version of that, so that, again, you can use it landscape with 2 pages side by side on your tablet device. I also went online and I looked at a whole bunch of online courses, and I did a whole bunch of searching around, and I found some really great free online courses that range from a couple of minutes. The one from Project Management Institute purports to only be 45 minutes long. It was pretty much only 45 minutes long. I played through it a little bit before it glitched out on me, but other than that. And then there's a couple that I listed that are much longer. They're actually full courses that you could click around and see which topic areas you might want to study more. There's videos from professors that are talking about different things. There's different exercises and resources on these online courses. The links are, again, all on nysits.org on the most recent post at the top of the page. For now, anyway. And they are also linked in the description of this video. So the Coursera one is free. It does have a paid certificate option. You don't need to do that. You can do the free one. It says something like audit this course. And that's put out by University of Virginia, Fundamentals of Project Planning and Management. There's one on a site called edX. edX also has a lot of really good coursework for different universities, put things out there. So they have an introduction to project management by the University of Adelaide. The Project Management Institute actually has, again, that 45-minute-ish long one called Kickoff. If you go to pmi.org/kickoff, they have a little wizard that walks you through to choose waterfall versus agile. But if you look at the top of the screen, you can just switch between waterfall and agile to make sure that you understand both of them. But it just kind of walks you through some of the project management terminology. And then if you really need to go in depth, the MIT System Project Management notes were highly technical and detailed, but they got into a lot of detail about things like the critical path method and a lot of different areas that I'm not going to be able to cover today in this overview. I also had found a quick guide to project management a number of years ago, and I have relinked that. And then I also started tagging posts with which topics they have. So as I go through and update the site, you will be able to click that link and get everything that's tagged with project management. Right now, I think I tagged the 2020 and 2017 project management resources. So you should be able to get all of that. For supervision, there is the performance problem flowchart, which is a resource that I've been using for a number of years. I think it's a great way to start looking at some supervision issues. We'll be going over that today. There are also CSEA booklets 6 and 18. Now, I know that CSEA booklets are no longer available to non-CSEA members, but I also know that a lot of people have copies that they've had for a long time, or they borrow copies from a friend. And if you can get a copy of booklet 6 or 18 that way, these ones would be the ones to look at. Again, I put the links. The link here for CSEA booklets just takes you to my post about CSEA booklets not being available, but it does also list out which booklets go with which topics in general. The next thing that I have for supervision are some books, and really just pieces of books. There's a couple chapters that were interesting in these OpenStax books. OpenStax is a open source online resource for people to reference textbooks. So there's a Principles of Management textbook and an Introduction to Business textbook. And I've given you a chapter to start with on each of those. And then Section 2, Chapter 2 of that project management guidebook that I was talking about a minute ago is also a really good supervision resource. It's about leadership. So again, I have linked all of those lovely things on the website. There are also some good free online courses. There is an edX course on exercising leadership foundational principles. That's from Harvard. And there's a little 35-minute-ish activity from Harvard Business School about leadership and resilience. It's actually about an Antarctic expedition. It's got to be Antarctic, right? People don't go to the Arctic. I think it must be Antarctic. I didn't watch the whole thing. I did it enough to see that it seemed like a good resource. And then again, there's the tag for supervision, so you can use that tag to find more resources on the site. Okay, so project management, 3 different subjects. Please pay attention to which one you are taking to know how in-depth you should study. For the grade 25 or M1 IT Specialist 4 exam, you just need to know supervising a project. Supervising a project tests ability to conduct and supervise activities necessary to achieve the goals and deadlines of the specific project. It's not acting as the project manager as much as it is being a part of a project and helping to supervise people that are on a project and communicate that sort of information about where are you right now, what's going on, how can we evaluate progress, how can we make sure that things are proceeding in the project as they should be. If you are taking the grade 27 exam for Manager of IT 1, you do need to know a little bit more about project management. You'll need to know terminology and concepts. So things like work breakdown structure, critical path, things like that. Project scheduling and control techniques, for example, CPM, which would be critical path methods. Creating and evaluating bids, monitoring project progress, controlling the project timeline, and evaluating the project. We'll be talking about all of those again in a little bit of overview in just a moment. And then for the higher grade levels, the topic is just called project management. So this is more of what you would want to review that full project management guidebook for, because this matches the project management guidebook. It also matches the Project Management Institute's Project Management Body of Knowledge book, PMBOK, if you might have heard of that. It is not spelled B-A-C-H like the composer, though, no matter what my captioner thinks. It is B-O-K. All right, that's also words. Cool, good job, captioner. The questions can also include things about how to define activities, track schedules, change control, stakeholders, risk management, things like that. So again, we'll be talking a little bit about things, but you're going to want to read that project management guidebook more in depth to get more information. So the first thing we have to start with, though, is what is a project anyway? And there's generally 2 big rules that we have to define something as a project to be managed using normal project management methods. First of all, it has to be temporary. It has to have a definitive beginning and end, a definite beginning, a definite end. It can't be something that's going to be ongoing forever. That's called operations. And operations management is an entirely different ballgame. So we are specifically talking about things that have a beginning and an end. The other thing is that it produces some sort of a unique deliverable. If this is something that gets done every month, that does have a beginning and end date, but it gets done every month again and again, that's still just operations. That's not a project. So a project is something where you're producing something unique. It could be a actual product. It could be some sort of software. It could be a service. It could be a report. But it's some sort of a unique deliverable that comes out of this. When we're defining a project, it makes sense to use what they call SMART objectives. And SMART is an acronym, and I'm just going to use the example of you studying for an exam right now as our goal here. So if your goal is to study for the exam, the SMART objective would start with S for specific. So you want to define which exam are you studying for, and when is the exam, and what are the topics that you need to study. So these sorts of things would make it very specific. It needs to be something measurable. So maybe you would say something like, I am going to attend the live stream for 2 hours, and I'm going to make sure that I study for at least half an hour on 3 different days during the next week. Something that you can actually measure whether you completed it or did not complete it. It does have to be something achievable. So saying, I'm going to study 4 hours a day, probably not achievable for most of us right now. We have work, we have other obligations. 4 hours a day is just not something that's going to happen for people. So achievable is an important part of this objective setting. It does have to be relevant. So studying is obviously relevant to you because you want to do well on the exam so that you can get promoted. It's something that is relevant to your life and it has meaning. And it does have to be time bound. So we can just say, oh, I'll study for the exam eventually. But we know that if we don't set aside time to do that regularly, we're going to end up putting it off and then not having a good result. The obvious time deadline is the date of the exam, but you might want to set mini goals earlier. And the same thing can happen with projects. You may have a definitive deadline. Something maybe needs to be done by the new fiscal year on April 1st. But you might also set shorter time bounds for different deliverables so that you can have objectives that you're more likely to meet. Every project also has constraints, and these are going to be talked about a lot in that project management handbook or guidebook, and they're often represented as a triangle. So the triangle reminds us that if you pull on one end and mess with one constraint, it does affect the other two constraints along the triangle. The first constraint is cost. How much budget do you have for this project? And that can be actual dollars that you're spending on software, but it can also be things like how much time people are spending on this, how many employees are assigned to the project. Those are different cost things. The scope of the project is what the project's going to complete. What are the things that this project intends to do? Okay. And then there's also a schedule. When do we need things done by? So you can imagine in our little mini project of studying for the exam, we have a cost in time mostly. You have a scope of which topics you're going to study, and a schedule for when the exam's going to happen, right? If you don't get started studying until later Maybe things pile up and all of a sudden you have 2 weeks to go until the exam and you have to smash all your studying in. Well, because your schedule has changed, that's the bottom leg there, the cost and the scope are also going to be changed. You're either going to need to spend a lot more time, that's your cost, studying per day, or you're going to need to cut scope. You're going to need to cut out some topics and maybe only study the ones that you feel like you need the most work in. So these three are all related to each other. But the traditional cost, scope, and schedule model is actually augmented by a fourth thing in our New York State Project Management Guidebook, because I can always meet cost, scope, and schedule if I'm willing to compromise on quality. So you'll see in the guidebook that they talk about CSSQ, and that stands for cost, scope, schedule, and quality. Because again, quality is, if I'm willing to let that slip, I can kind of maybe not study as much and still cover everything, just not very well. One of the things that we need to know about as we go through project management is what are the project phases? And exact minutia about project phases is something I would say is less likely to be on this exam. If you take like the project management professional exam, the PMP certifications, they care a lot about minutia, but in this exam for the state test, especially if you are taking the first couple levels, the supervising a project or the project management fundamentals, there's going to be more of generalized questions instead of very, very specific ones. Read the exam announcement if you're not quite sure what to study for these. We're going to go with the project phases that are listed out in that New York State Project Management Guidebook, because that's also what's listed on the exam announcement. So we have initiation of the project. These are the standard phases. Initiation is when we start to get the sponsor together, we get the project team together, we kind of set a general scope, a general idea of what we're going to accomplish and when. And then we work towards planning and executing. Those kind of are in a circle because as we plan, we can start performing tasks. And then as tasks happen either on time or not on time, the execution affects the plan. So we have to keep cycling around. And that's the monitoring and controlling aspect of project management. And then at the end of the project, there is a formal closeout process, and we'll go over a little bit about what is expected for that closeout process. This would be what you would find in most project management texts, but in the New York State Project Management Guidebook, we actually do start back one step further, which is with origination of the project. So origination of the project is when you make your proposal to, say, the IT governance board or whoever manages project approvals in your agency. And origination is basically putting together that general proposal, figuring out where it fits into the priorities, if it fits into the organization's strategic plan for the year, and then getting the go-ahead to even start looking at the project, really. So that would be the origination step before even initiation can happen. More details about that origination step are also available in those guidebooks. For project initiation, I wanted to pull out one of the charts from the Project Management Guidebook to show you what sort of things are in this guidebook and to see kind of what we can do to prepare for this exam. So project initiation, one of the things that's listed in the guidebook are all the deliverables, but this is actually taken from the kind of pitfalls area and what's going on with the project initiation. And I thought it was a good overview for us of this phase of the project, even though it uses a really, really corny analogy. So you'll have to stick with it for a second. So we're preparing for the project. We have to identify a project sponsor. That's the person who's going to say, yes, I take responsibility for this project. I will make sure the resources that we need are assigned to the project. I will authorize the budget, all of those things. So their analogy says a project without a project sponsor is like a ship without a rudder. No matter how sleek your hull or how tall your mast, it just can't get anywhere useful. And that's true of a project. If you don't have a project sponsor who is actually going to help you get the resources you need to get the project done, your project is not going to be as successful, right? Conducting a kickoff meeting helps to make sure that people know who is involved with the project. But to continue with the ship metaphor, as they say, it's important to get everybody on board before setting sail. So we're going to start this project. We want to make sure everybody kind of knows what's going on, what are we trying to accomplish, things like that. The kickoff meeting I will talk more about in just a moment too. Then we have to define CSSQ. Remember, that's the cost, scope, schedule, and quality. So we're going to develop some sort of a high-level schedule that's kind of like our map for where we're going. It's not going to be very detailed at this point. We will perform risk identification to identify and document risks. And I will be talking more about risk analysis as we go through this presentation today. And risk analysis is like lighthouses. It's like identifying lighthouses so that you can see where you might wreck your ship. And then the last couple bits here are developing an initial plan, including developing a communication plan about how people are going to talk to each other, and getting approval to make sure that we are ready to go and actually start this project, okay? I will be answering, I see some questions in the chat, and I see that Sarah's helping out with those a little bit. I will be answering those questions after I go through the phases. So I just want to make sure that I get through the phases first, because I might answer some of your questions as I go. So for the kickoff meeting, you have a meeting, you try to pile everybody in, as many people as you can. Maybe it's more than one meeting, but ideally you get as many people as you can together to talk about what the purpose of the project is, what are your objectives, to start some initial planning, talk about some general risks, stakeholders to see if we need to bring more people into the meeting, how is it going to be organized, what are the roles, the responsibilities happening, and having some questions and answers and next steps. Ideally, you want a nice big meeting with everybody, whether it's on Zoom or whether it's in person. That I don't know what the efficacy, the effectiveness of Zoom meetings are compared to in person, but generally you want a big meeting with everybody because that's going to get you the best results about making sure people are on the same page. So for something like planning, if you can get, say you're building a new software product, if you can get the database unit and the front-end developer unit and the programmers and the subject matter experts and the project managers all together at once to say, okay, here's what else is on our schedule, here's when we'll have time to do this, here's how long we think this will take in general, so that you can start to get a general plan put together, that's going to end up with a better result, right? If you start to plan your project for a new software, a new website, and you don't have the database team on board, for example, maybe they're doing another big project and they can't get to your project right now, and that's going to really throw off your whole schedule. if you don't include them in these kickoff sort of meetings. You're not asking for commitments about exact days at this point or anything. It's just a general starting point. For our general project planning, we want to start with a basic work breakdown structure, okay? And as we go from initiation into real planning, we're going to make this work breakdown structure more and more detailed. The work breakdown structure basically takes our example, like we're going to build a website, and breaks it down into individual tasks. Ideally, that can be assigned to one person or maybe one group, so that we can track which tasks are dependent on other tasks, so that we can actually estimate how long things might take, and so that we know how dependencies flow between tasks. So to go with this website example, I start my work breakdown structure maybe with a 1.0, and I call it a website project. And then I know that building this website is going to have 3 major areas. There's a design, content, and development. And I just numbered those 2, 3, and 4. It doesn't mean they necessarily go in order that way. It doesn't mean that the design's more important than the content. It's just the way that I happen to number them. And it lets me refer to them as I start to map out dependencies and try and track how long things are going to take. Now, most people, if they were actually managing this as a project, are going to use something like Excel document, or they're going to use Microsoft project management software, or custom project management software. So they wouldn't have it just as a little diagram like this, but this is to show you what the work breakdown structure might look like. So maybe I ask my designers, okay, when you design a website, what are the main tasks that you need? And I'll write down 2.1, select layout, 2.2, design graphics, 2.3, approve design. And we can get even more detailed in those areas as needed. If I'm just doing the high level, maybe this is the version that I work on as a project manager, and then maybe within the team, they talk about like 2.1.1, research 7 different layout options, 2.1.2, verify accessibility. All these different things that they can do can be added as further detail as needed. And then we have things about content and development that we add to our work breakdown structure, and we can start to draw links between them. So for example, down on content, if you can see 3.4, it says insert content in page. I obviously can't do that until I have a page to put it in, right? So that has to either be dependent on the design, maybe, or maybe I can put the content in the page once a test environment is set up from the developers. So I would ask the teams that are working on it, what are the dependencies, and just make sure I can track that really well. Because the next thing I do after I make my work breakdown structure is I start to try and figure out how things are related to each other. And I have gone from websites to sheds now, because this is just the example that I already had ready. So this would be a network diagram. This kind of shows dependencies between different objects, different tasks in the whole project. So in this diagram, I'm building a shed, and I have to select the shed design before I can go buy materials. Once I buy materials, I can start building the shed base, and I can also start cutting wood for the shed, walls and roof and everything. Once I've built the shed base, I can supervise how that cement hardens, make sure it's hardening properly. I have to probably wet it down or whatever you do with cement. And once the cement has hardened and I've cut the wood, I can start to assemble a shed, and then the shed will be complete. When you see a network diagram, that lets you kind of figure out dependencies to know who's going to be working when, but it also lets you figure out what's called the critical path. So anytime your path splits, like from buy materials here, where the path splits to shed base and cut wood, you can calculate how long that leg of the path is. So in this case, the top leg of the path is that 3 days plus 2 days is 5 days. And the bottom leg of the path is only 2 days for cutting the wood, because they come back together again at assemble shed. Once I figure that out, I take the longest path through my network, and that becomes what's known as the critical path. So in this case, our critical path goes along the top of our network diagram, from selecting the shed design, to buying materials, to building the shed base, to supervising cement hardening, assembling the shed, and the shed is complete. Why is that called the critical path? Because if any one of those things takes longer than expected, the whole project is going to take longer than expected. The item that is not on the critical path, cutting wood, if that takes longer than expected, my whole project could still be okay, because I have some wiggle room in there. I have the 5 days that it takes for the shed base to be built and the cement to harden, and just sometime in that 5 days, as long as I get the wood cut, I will be fine. So that one would not be on the critical path. Oftentimes you'll see, instead of a network diagram drawn out the way that I just had it drawn, you'll see what's called a Gantt chart. And the Gantt chart might be just a simple Excel spreadsheet like this. It's harder to see dependencies on a Gantt chart that's written this way, but you can kind of see the critical path on this one. The long amount of time going down from buying materials, building the shed base, supervising cement hardening, and then assembling the shed. But you can also see the cut wood part kind of floating in the middle there, and that bit is the non-critical path. But it's going to be a lot clearer if you use software that draws arrows for you between them, like your Microsoft project would draw arrows to let you know, okay, these things go to these other things, and there are dependencies between these bits. Or you might see it something like this. This is another example of a Gantt chart. You can see in this one, there are actually, let's see, I don't know how to do a pointer. Well, we'll just pretend that I can do a pointer. You can see right in the middle where it says number 2, generate concepts. It says review comp products, search patents, brainstorm concepts. Do you see how all of those line up on the left and they have arrows going into them? That means all 3 of those can start at the same time. They have dependencies on something ahead of them, but they can start, or, you know, that had to happen before they could start, but they can all start at the same time. And you'll be able to see these arrows that either have when one thing finishes, another thing can start, or that 2 things can start together, or sometimes 2 things have to finish together. It's another type of dependency that you might see. When you get everybody together for the kickoff meeting, you're going to talk about some risks for the project. And as you start to build out your project plan, you're going to come up with even more risks for the project. These risks can kind of be placed along this matrix that or a similar matrix to this one, where you assess how likely is it that this thing would happen, and if it does happen, what's the impact of it happening? So maybe in my building a shed example that we're now on, I can say, okay, there's a possibility that lumber prices are going to become even more insane again. So there's a likelihood that lumber prices will go up. And if lumber prices go up, Is that going to impact my project? Yes, that will impact my project. Probably have a medium impact. Maybe I just need to reassess costs. And maybe there's a medium likelihood for that happening, so I would put it in the middle of this matrix. Maybe there is a high likelihood, though, of shortages, of a lumber shortage. And that would obviously have a very high impact if I can't get the lumber that I need. So I would first address the things that are in the darkest boxes, things that have a high likelihood, and especially if they have a high impact. Then go on to the medium colored boxes and then worry about the low boxes. But for each of those things, I need to decide what I want to do with that risk. I can either avoid it by maybe choosing to use a different product, or I can say, I'm not even going to do this project right now because it's too risky. That would avoid the risk entirely. But I could avoid it maybe by saying, I'm going to buy all my wood ahead of time before I even start the project, and I will have extra wood, and that's okay. You can transfer the risk to a third party, often by something like buying insurance or by contracting with somebody else and letting them worry about the risk. You can mitigate the risk by taking different actions to try to make it less likely to happen or to make the impact less bad if it does happen. And you can just accept a risk. Sometimes risks exist and you can't do anything about them. And maybe they're very low possibility of happening or very low impact. So you just say, yeah, I acknowledge that that's a risk and I'm okay with it. Like there's a risk that an asteroid is going to, come hit the planet and we never have forests again. I don't know. It's a very macabre risk, but I just have to accept that risk. There's absolutely nothing I can do about that. Project execution is the doing stuff part of the project. A lot of this is going to overlap with SDLC, the System Development Lifecycle. So please see the systems analysis live stream I already did, or read the System Development Lifecycle portion of the Project Management Guidebook. It'll help you with some of this project execution and planning and how they interact with each other. But the controlling and monitoring activities are going to generally be, if you are responsible for the project management, things like review meetings, resolving conflicts. That happens not when people just want to get into fisticuffs and they're having angry words, but also sometimes there are conflicting priorities. And sometimes there are conflicting ideas about how to solve problems that have to happen. So you have to work to resolve these conflicts and resolve other project problems. What other project problems might we have? We might have problems with resources. Maybe somebody quits. Maybe somebody ends up working on another project and they don't have as much time as they thought they did. Maybe you have too many resources and there's not enough work for them all to do. I don't think that ever really happens. The schedule might have problems. Maybe you're only 50% done with your tasks, but the schedule initially estimated that you'd be 60% done by now. So you need to figure out, okay, how do I fix this project issue? And if we remember back to our cost, scope, schedule, and quality, I know that I can fix a schedule problem by impacting cost or scope or quality if I'm willing to let quality be compromised. The budget might have issues. Maybe you're over budget and you need to ask for more resources. And scope creep is a really big issue on projects. As soon as you start to dig into a project and look at the issues that surround whatever it is you're trying to do, it's very common that the scope of the project wants to expand to try to fix everything all at once. Because you have resources right now, you have approval right now. It's very tempting to try to fix everything you can right now. But controlling the scope of a project is really, really an important job for a project manager to do. And one way they do that is by controlling change on the project. So frequently very large projects will have change control boards, change management boards, literally people that need to sign off on every change that is made to the initial scope of the project. It's an important job for the project manager. When you do closeout for your project, you're going to kind of be aiming to do about 3 things. The first is documenting lessons learned. You want to also do an administrative closeout. That means maybe a team room that you had made, or a Slack channel, or whatever you use to communicate, making sure that gets archived correctly and cleaned up so that people don't have to have it in their sidebars forever. And then having a celebration of some sort to celebrate your accomplishments, because we want to recognize all the work that the project team has done. Everybody's probably really tired at the end of a big project. And I think that cake is an excellent reward, especially because we're not going to get in state government, right? We don't have the opportunity to get monetary bonuses as much, just due to the way the civil service system works. But we need to do something to acknowledge the work people have done. All right, before we go on to planning and managing work, this would be the supervision section. I'm going to look at questions on the live chat and answer some questions, and then we're going to take a tiny break in between the 2 topics here. So, okay. So I see some questions about any place to find questions on project management. Supervising a project seems hard to find any information on. And do we think they would ask any questions outside of the New York State Project Management book? Should we focus more on what the New York State book has specifically? Okay. The New York State book does have some questions you can ask yourself, like checklists as part of projects. So it doesn't really have questions that would be good test question material, but that's why I'm including the coursework that I found on Coursera and on edX, because some of those have really good questions in the coursework. So you can skip down to the homework section and look at some of those types of questions. I think a number of years ago, I did come up with a couple of project management questions at one point. I do not know what I did with them. I would have to dig through my archives to find them and resurface them. But there may be some in like the 2017 files or something. And will they ask questions outside of that New York State Project Management book? I do not know. I cannot predict the future. I cannot predict what's going to happen. I do know that project management is not a very common topic on civil service exams. So I would go with look at what the exam announcement says for your topics, and make sure that as you read that exam announcement, if there's any part of it that you don't understand, you just go on like Wikipedia and look it up, or put it in quotes on Google, do a search and see if you can find out more about that term. The general idea is to get an overview of project management. And the New York State Project Management Guidebook, seeing as how it's an official New York State publication, is a good place to start. So that is the best resource that I can point you to as a starting point. But at the end of the day, the definitive list of what may be on the exam is what was listed on the exam announcement, and what I reproduced on the subject of examination like chart thing and in this slide deck for you. Okay, so I'm going to take about a 7-minute break before we go to supervision, planning and managing work, as it says on the slides next to me here. And we'll come back and do some more supervision in just a little bit. If you are only taking the IT specialist for exam, you do not need this next portion. So have a happy studying time with the resources I've given you for project management. But we'll see you back here in about 7 minutes. welcome back. We are going to talk about supervision, administrative supervision topics. We're going to talk a little bit about the difference between those first of all, though. So supervision, administration, administrative supervision, 3 different topics on the exam. I'm going to go through the descriptions of them and tell you a little bit about the differences. Let me just switch over to my slides. Ta-da! Planning and managing work, 3 different subjects. For supervision, this is planning, organizing, and controlling activities of a work unit. So normally just like one team towards predetermined objectives. They're covered in situational question format. So basically what that would mean is it would say something like, when this happens, what should you do? And it might include topics like assigning and reviewing work, evaluating performance, maintaining work standards, motivating and developing subordinates, implementing procedural change, increasing efficiency, and dealing with problems of absenteeism, morale, and discipline. That would be for the IT specialist, manager IT1, sorry. Manager IT1 does that supervision. The next step up for the grade 27-29 M4, M5 assistant director titles is administration. So supervision is supervising people. Administration is more of the managerial tasks that are not directly related to interacting with a person whom you are supervising. So these are going to be tasks about directing the whole organization towards goals, like objectives and policies, making decisions based on your position, your authority, how do you forecast and plan for the future. And we're going to talk a little bit about some of these different areas that people work on. The administrative supervision topic, which is only for the grade 29 and above, manager of ITS 2 and above, basically involves being a supervisor of supervisors and how do you supervise your supervisors. So directing activities of a large subordinate staff, including subordinate supervisors. So this is more about coordinating the work of a number of different units and making sure that you have staff development and supports in place for the supervisors working under you. There is a acronym that apparently nobody called me out on for years, that I had the S and the D in the wrong order, but POSCORB, it's not a real word. It's an awful acronym. I think today they would probably have come up with a much catchier one, but this is the one that we have from quite a ways back that does a pretty good job of describing the different activities a manager might be expected to do. And as we go through these, you'll see that some of them fit more into supervision, some of them fit more into the the administration side, and it doesn't matter which side they're on except for when you only need to study one or the other, okay? So remember that if you're taking the manager of IT 1, you're going to be focusing more on dealing with your team, the people directly under you, maybe a couple supervisors under you, but not a large number of disparate units. So you're focusing more on kind of a narrower view. The administration, again, is more of the running of the organization, and then administrative supervision is managing your managers and managing your subordinate supervisors. So planning. That would be developing goals and work plans that would be establishing a broad sketch of work to be completed and any of the procedures that we need to implement that. The O would be for organizing. Organizing means, how do you structure the units under you? How do you structure how people are doing work? Maybe you have a group that works on analysis and another group that works on report writing. Or maybe you have people take one project and they move it from analysis through report writing and they shepherd it all the way. That type of organization of how do you break up the work tasks and make your processes flow through the unit. The S stands for staffing. It's important to fill positions and recruit people and select the right candidates for positions. We also include in staffing a bit of the staff development, making sure people continually are moving towards what they want in their career and what will help the team in the future as they go on, and making sure that they get the time to do that. That would also be part of staffing and this whole management activity. The D is for directing. So that would be, I've planned, I've organized, I have the people. Directing is basically saying, here is what I want you to do, people. It is giving the directions, making the decisions, and delegating out the work. Coordinating or communicating. I like communicating a little bit more than coordinating. I think coordinating is the official term, though. Is now that I've sent this work out into the world, people are going to start doing pieces of the work and making sure that things come together as they need to, and that people are effectively communicating, and that the resources are able to work and not waiting for other dependencies to finish as much as possible. The next step up the ladder is reporting what's going on. So this would be more of upward management, right? So we have to manage the people that are below us, but also have to manage expectations of the people above us. And sometimes you have to manage the people above you to say, look, we need this. We need more resources here. We need less pressure about this deadline because there's no way to get this deadline done in this time, but we can do this other piece. So reporting upwards is really an important part of your management activity. And then budgeting, this would be more for the administrative side, to make sure that you know the fiscal impact that your decisions might have, but also to make sure that you have appropriate accounting practices, that you know your procedures for requesting budget, for staffing plans for the future, how much budget you're going to have for that. So all these lovely budgeting things would be more of a administrative task. But budgeting time is also kind of a budget that just falls more under the earlier things we talked about: planning, organizing, directing. That would be more of budgeting time. So this is more of budgeting actual fiscal resources or staffing, headcount sort of things. Okay. In one of the courses that I have included as one of your resources, this is from that OpenStax book, there was a great little model about problem solving, and I just included it here to step through it with you. Oh gosh, that's like an awful pun because it's steps and they made it stairs. Ugh. So first you have to define what the problem is. And this is a really great way to approach your questions when you get civil service questions on the test, is look at it and see if you can define what is the problem that they're talking about in this question. Then, once you've figured out what the problem is, and sometimes you do need more information to even define the problem. So sometimes the question answer choices are going to say something like, Oh, you need to go get more information from this other person. And that might be the correct answer. Once you've defined the problem and know what the issue is, then you can identify some possible solutions. And depending on the situation that's put forth in your exam question, you might want to identify possible solutions. That might be your next step. Then you select one or more alternatives to follow up on, put the plan into action. And I think that it's really important to point out step 5 here is the follow-up to see if the problem's been solved. I think that gets left out of the problem-solving pathway a lot. It's like you identify the problem, you come up with solutions, you choose one and you go for it and you do it. But the measuring to make sure that the problem's actually been solved is a really important part of this problem-solving process. One of the problems that comes up most frequently for supervisors is performance problems. And this is an issue that impacts the generic supervision topic, but also the administrative supervision. And it also affects even some of the project management things that we were talking about if your project resources are not getting things done that you want them to get done. So let's talk a little bit more about performance problems. The biggest rule to think about when you're looking at performance problems is to determine if the issue is worth pursuing. There are all sorts of issues that people have in the workplace for all sorts of different reasons, and not all of them are worth your time as a manager or as a supervisor. The guiding principle for whether an issue is worth pursuing is if it is impacting the work of the unit. If you have somebody on your team, and this comes from that performance problems flowchart, by the way, this example even comes from the text that goes along with that. If you have someone on your team that just doesn't want to socialize with the rest of the team, they kind of stick by themselves and they're not participating in the team morning meetings as much as you'd like them to, the first thing you have to ask yourself is the issue worth pursuing? Is it a problem that they're not participating in the morning meetings? Are they not giving information about their projects? That might be a problem. Are they just not participating in the general banter about the weather and what game was on last night or what great TV show's happening? Then that's probably less of a problem, right? So to determine whether the issue is worth pursuing at all, you should first make sure it's actually impacting work in some way. Once you've done that, there is a flowchart that I included in our resources, the performance problem flowchart. And it's not really a flowchart so much as it's a checklist of things that you should probably check out to make sure you as a manager have provided, or as a supervisor, have provided clear enough instruction and enough for this employee to be able to succeed. So this is the performance problems flowchart. The first thing you want to make sure is that your expectations are clear, that people know how they can succeed or know what you're expecting from them. I once had a supervisor who told me that I wasn't doing what he wanted because I needed to show more growth and ownership of the system. And I had no clue what he meant. I, to this day, have no clue what he meant. His expectations were very unclear. And I kept saying, is there some specific task you need me to do that I am not doing? But he would keep saying, nope, it's your growth and ownership of the system. No clue what he meant. So please make sure your expectations are clear. And a good way to do that is to ask people to explain what they think you're looking for. The second question is, do they need resources? And that could mean they need actually resources, like they need data from somebody that's not providing it. They need software that hasn't been approved yet. They need a special piece of equipment to do this task that they don't have. Or they might need training. We'll get back to that in just a moment. But do they need some sort of a resource? Do they need time to do it? Do they have too many other things on their plate and they need help prioritizing? So that's the next step for the performance problem flowchart. The third thing is, do they even know there's a problem? Sometimes people are very upset about something and they feel like an employee is intentionally not meeting expectations, but they're not providing timely and frequent feedback to let the employee know there is a problem. I know that in the state, it can be very, especially in these IT titles, it can be very common for people to not even get their yearly performance evaluations on time because supervisors are also very busy and overworked. I'm not blaming supervisors at any point here. I've been in that situation too. But if we don't give people feedback about problems, they're not going to know there are problems. And maybe more than once a year is a good way to talk to people and let them know if there are problems. The next three kind of all go together, so I put them in a little line here. Is success penalized? So if you're trying to get somebody to maybe close out tickets, you're in a help desk of some sort maybe, and they need to close tickets. What's their reward for closing tickets well? Do they just get more tickets that other people who weren't doing as well didn't want to do? So is their success penalized somehow? Or do they actually get to work on something they might be more interested in or choose a different ticket that they would like to work on more? Is poor performance rewarded? If somebody is not working to the standard you need, do you take away their work and give it to somebody else to finish just because it needs to be done? Because that could be kind of rewarding them for slacking a little bit and not performing to the level you want. It's not actually helping them to understand that there is a problem. And is there any penalty for not meeting the standard? So if there is no penalty for not meeting the standard, if you're not holding people accountable, then there's not going to be any reason for people to try to meet the standard. I briefly mentioned training earlier. So the next thing we look at is there a skill deficiency? Is there something that needs to be trained? Does the person know how to do what you're asking them to do? And if they need to be trained, it's your job as a supervisor or manager to make sure that they get that training. We can also look at the task itself. Can the task be made easier? Does the task need to be done the way that you're asking for it to be done? What is the actual end goal that you have with this task? When I used to work in a different job, one of the tasks that we had was literally looking up individual tickets one by one. You had to type in the numbers, like a 6 or 7 digit number, to see whether a certain process had finished or not. And you had to keep doing it for every single ticket. And when I had some free time, I was able to get approval to work on a little script that would go out every 15 minutes and just check all of the tickets and send back an email that said, here are the ones that are done, please move them to the next step. So that made the task a lot easier for everybody, because now people didn't need to go back and type in all the ticket numbers again and again to make sure they were making progress and moving things to the next step when the processing was done. Ideally, that could be automated even further, right? For somebody to automate it so that when the processing is done, it's automatically checked a little bit and sent along the way. That would be even more of a benefit. But instead of, continually yelling at people for not checking their ticket numbers fast enough. Maybe we can make the task a little easier somehow. And then, are there any other obstacles going on? This is something you would need to talk to the employee and figure out what's going on. Hey, I expected this. It doesn't seem to be happening. And you kind of go through some of these flowchart questions with them and just ask, hey, is anything else going on? Is there another reason why this isn't happening? All of these things, according to the performance problems flowchart, all of these things are completely under management control. I think it's a little bit more fuzzy than that sometimes, but a lot of this is under management control, right? It's under your control as a manager or supervisor to make decisions about these things. There is a last step that is completely under the employee's control, though, and this is where you would end up with the need to pursue disciplinary action or performance improvement plans and things like that. And that would be, does the employee even want to change? So you've gone through all these steps. The person has what they need to be successful, but they are still not meeting the standard that you need them to meet for business reasons and in a reasonable standard that they should be doing to complete the job that you have hired them to do. If they do not want to change to meet that standard, then you're at an impasse. You need to go towards more formal mitigation strategies. Usually that would involve something like talking to labor relations and figuring out how to either get this employee to want to change or how to move in a different direction. Unfortunately, sometimes things just don't work out. So when we're looking at these questions, we have 2 CSEA booklets to work through, which is really helpful for us. But when you're working on the questions in general, I have some tips for you that I found make answering these questions a bit easier. First, when you're reading, underline or circle tricky wording. Like if it says least, make sure that you pay attention to the word least, because least appropriate versus most appropriate, obviously going to be a very different answer. Maybe label true false choices. So maybe if you see a question that says which one of these would be least appropriate and it's getting you confused because it's kind of a double negative, maybe next to each question you write, yes, this is a good idea. No, this seems like a bad idea. And hopefully you will have like either 3 things that seem like a good idea and 1 thing that's a bad idea, or the other way around, so that you'll be able to kind of see one of these things is not like the other. Next, make sure you're asking yourself, does it disrupt work? Because sometimes the answer really is, just leave it alone. Don't do anything with it. Take all grievances seriously. People don't complain unless there's something wrong. Even if you think that it's not worth complaining about, you're not validating what your employee has taken time out to say to you. So, or what another supervisor maybe has taken time out to say to you. So take all grievances seriously. That doesn't mean that you necessarily like prosecute every grievance to the fullest degree of the law. It does mean that you don't just like wave it off like, oh, that's just whoever being whoever. It does mean that you actually listen to what people say and try to address why they're feeling upset about something. You do want to delegate work where you can. And delegating work means letting your resources actually accomplish tasks to help you meet your goals, right? We only have a certain number of hours in the day, so we need to deploy our resources strategically to ensure that we can meet goals. Even if it's not quite done to the standard that you would do it, as long as it's meeting what you actually need, please try to delegate more work. But never delegate discipline. Don't ever try to have somebody else discipline somebody for you. And that kind of goes down the line too. If you're a manager and there's a supervisor under you that you need to discipline somebody under them, talk with that supervisor about what needs to happen. And if that supervisor's not getting on board, you can't kind of skip over them. You need to make sure that there is still continuity in that. And if the supervisor is really not doing their job as a supervisor, you actually need to address that with the supervisor. So try to follow chain of command for delegating discipline. And if you're having issues, make sure that you actually talk to people. Because in most cases, more direct approaches are better. You just talk to people and you ask them, what's going on? Why is this happening? I've noticed X is happening and I find it concerning because this, that, and the other. Can you explain what's going on? And actually talking with somebody about it. I know that we've a history of being more indirect with people in a lot of agencies where maybe memos go out to a whole team about a certain policy that needs to be upheld or a certain thing that needs to be done a certain way. But just talking with the one person who's doing it incorrectly is going to be much more effective. When you're reading these questions, be wary of words that are too strong for the situation. So you're going to want to try to think of what would happen first. Like, what would you do first in these situations? Or what would you do next in the situation if something's already been done? Because it may be appropriate to take stronger action if initial actions do not work out, but you're going to want to start with what would you do first? And because these questions, these supervision questions, administrative supervision and administration questions are given all across the state for people in different jobs at different agencies, you want to choose whatever works most of the time for most people, most situations, in kind of a sunshine, rainbow, happy land where things work the way they're supposed to. Okay? They literally give the same supervision question set, not exactly the same questions. The bank of questions they choose from is the same for corrections officers, for transportation representatives, and for legal secretaries, like all across the state, Long Island to Buffalo, all sorts of different jobs. So just remember that as you're going through the supervision questions, that it's not specific to your agency, and it's not even really specific to IT. I do have some review questions for this one. I'm going to say, first of all, reminder, please do not post answers in the chat. I will put up little polls, and we're not going to take that long with the polls because I also fixed the lag problem from last week. We only have about a 5-second lag this week. I don't know why there's still a lag, but you know, live doesn't always mean live. So I'm going to put up a question. Again, please do not post answers in the chat. I will put up a poll and I would like you to try to answer. And I have a couple of practices for us. And I see a question in the chat. Will the more detailed slides be made available as a V2? Yes, they will. I just wanted to upload something for people earlier so that you could have something to take notes on while we were talking or follow along with. But yes, I do intend to upload the V2 slides as soon as we are done. Review question 1. Ready, set, go. Which criteria would be best for a supervisor to use when assigning work? And I'm going to put up the poll. Engage. Poll. Question 1. A, B, C, Closing the poll. Okay, looks like most people did choose the correct answer there. The correct answer to this one is letter C. That is the correct answer. I see a couple people chose letter D. Letter D is really, in an ideal world, that would work out really nicely, but because everybody has tasks that they dislike, you're going to end up with some tasks that people don't want to do. Like maybe everyone hates to take out the garbage or something. There's going to be tasks that are just not anyone's cup of tea and they still need to be done. So most of the time, in most situations, for most people, you're going to have to assign tasks based on employee abilities. And this is another case where thinking about all across the state and all across different jobs makes a lot of sense. Because if you think about, for example, someone who's maybe opening envelopes at Department of Tax to scan in tax forms, are they going to be able to choose their own tasks? No, it's going to be much more of a this is what you must do sort of a job. So try to think about a job that is as far away from your job as you can possibly think. Maybe it is those people scanning in forms at tax. And remember to double check your answers against that job. Question 2. Which statement least represents a basic principle of the employee appraisal process? I have underlined the word least here for you because you cannot underline on your screen, but please note that during the exam, these questions will likely not be underlined. You will have to do that part yourself. I'm going to put the timer up above my head again, and I'm going to open up a poll again. Last few seconds. Okay. This one was a harder question, right? So we're looking for which statement least represents a basic principle of the employee appraisal process. And this is a good example of a question where writing the little true and falses next to the questions can help you. So should appraisals be mostly objective? Well, it's important to know what the difference between objective and subjective is. Objective is when I make an observation that is based on just fact. It is based on some sort of an observed thing that if I observe it and if you observe it, we're both going to agree on the fact. Like the employee completed 12 scanning of tax forms today. I don't know why I'm on scanning tax forms. Wrong season for that, but okay. Is that something that I should be doing for a appraisal? Absolutely. I should definitely be trying to do objective observation. Letter B the supervisor's value judgments can affect the appraisal. That's true. That is something that happens. Nobody is without bias. Everybody has biases. We try to recognize our biases so that we can make sure we're being as, again, objective as possible. But everybody has value judgments. Letter C says appraisal of future potential should be based on subjective judgment. Subjective means opinion. So subjective is, I don't like that, without having a real reason why that everybody can agree with. So if we base somebody's future potential on a subjective judgment, that just means I'm letting my own opinions flavor the employee appraisal. And that is not a best practice. Letter D, employee strengths should be emphasized rather than weaknesses. That's also true. You should emphasize employee strengths, what happened well, because if your appraisal is only weaknesses, that is not going to lead to change or to an employee that is willing to listen to what needs to be improved. Should it have some weaknesses? Probably, or at least some areas to grow. Sometimes people really are just really good at what they're doing, and you could put in something like, if you would like to grow to next promotional level, here are the things that you should work on. But A, B, and D, apple, banana, and donut, are all true to some extent or another. Letter C, for cookies, is the one that you should really try to avoid in the employee appraisal process. Therefore, because this is asking for least, letter C for cookies is the correct answer here. Okay? It's a little trickier. Let's look at question 3. I did make sure to include a couple of leasts in here for you to get more practice. So this one is, which factor is least important when setting up vacation schedules? I'm putting the poll up right now. All right, last few moments on the poll. If you'd like to choose an answer to see whether you're correct or not. Remember, on the test, you should definitely fill in a bubble for every answer. All right. The correct answer to this one is letter A. The least important factor is the competence of an employee when you're scheduling vacation schedules. If you think about it, if you are taking competence into account, what is the rule? Like, do you let you only let competent people go on vacation so that you only have incompetent people left in your unit? Or do you only let the incompetent people go on vacation so that you only have competent people left in your unit? I don't know how you would figure that out so that it works for your unit, but the competence of the employee doesn't actually come into factor at all when you're setting up vacation schedule. The first thing that you look at when you're setting up a vacation schedule is, who do I need in the office? And that is letters B and D together. So that is letter B for banana and D for donut together. Tell me, who do I need in the office? Are we going to have a lot of workload and I need all hands on deck? Maybe very few people can take vacation. Am I going to have a time when one part of the unit is very busy, but another part of the unit has much less work? Maybe I can let part of the unit take vacation at that time, and the other part of the unit can take vacation at another time. It always depends on how essential people's services are and what your unit's anticipated workload is. If you work in division of budget and people want to take vacation around, let's say, March 31st to the first few weeks in April, maybe it's a little hard to let them have vacation then. But if they are somebody who works on like the website and they do a portion of the website that's not affected by the budget year, maybe it's fine to let them go on vacation. So you first have to look at how many people you can allow to be on vacation, and then you look at the vacation preferences, and that actually goes by seniority by most of our union contracts. The competence of employees does not come into factor at all for vacation scheduling purposes. The next one is the last review question I have for you here. There are some more questions on some of the older videos that have little stories and everything with them. So you can watch those if you want some more interactive with me, or you can see if you can get someone to lend you one of the CSEA booklets to practice from. So review question 4. In trying to reduce your employee turnover rate, which one of the following initial steps would be least appropriate? I forgot to start a timer. We'll call it a couple more moments before I close the poll. All right, last chance. Okay, review question 4 here. The correct answer is letter C. That is the least appropriate thing for us to do as an initial step, because we don't even know that that's what the problem is right now. Remember, the first step in our little problem solving staircase was define the problem, right? If the problem is turnover, we don't know why people are leaving. We don't know why people are going other places, or maybe they're not passing probation. That would be letter A, to improve training procedures. But I need more information before I can make changes. And that's a pretty common theme in a lot of supervisory questions. You need information before you can make changes. So you can review training procedures. You can ask a few trusted employees for insight. You can review records of past employees. But actually changing performance standards and time off are not necessarily going to increase morale. You don't know that that's the issue. And also might cause other problems in your unit. So that is not a good initial step. It may be a step that happens down the line if you find out that those are what the problem areas are, and it's a available option for you without impacting what you need to get done for whatever business your unit does. But because it's not the best initial step, letter C is the answer to this question. All right. So that is the end of today's live stream about project management and supervision and administrative supervision and administration a little bit. Again, if you are taking the exam that needs budgeting and the financial stuff, I can't remember what it's called right now. I closed it. Oh, no, there it is. Strategic planning, fiscal analysis, management of budgets and contracts. I found some really good resources. I am going to put up that post a little bit later this afternoon for you. And also the preparing reports and official documents. That one is on everything from manager of ITS 1 all the way up through directors. I have some good resources for that one as well that I'm going to be putting up again on the site this afternoon, nysits.org. I will also link them in the description on this video once it is ready to, whatever YouTube does with it. And I will probably push out another newsletter about that as well, just to make sure resources get out to people. I am happy to answer some questions now if people have questions they want to put in the chat. Otherwise, I hope you guys have a great day. If you want to comment to me later, you can definitely pop comments on these videos. Oh, and thank you, moderator Sarah. She's got my back. If you do want to tip me, I do have a tip jar. Tip at ko-fi.com/tonertutoring. That is this channel name. That is the name of my tutoring company. So if you would like to, please do not unless you are financially able to do so. And I appreciate it if you would like to do that. Anyway, any questions? All right, I don't see anything. Remember, if you do have questions and you didn't get it in before I turn off. Oh, the second O. Oh, the second O in POSCORB. Okay, POSCORB. The second O is actually part of coordinating or communicating. I told you it was a dumb acronym. It's literally just the O that goes with co. CO. It's sometimes written with a little o so that people know that it's not really part of the acronym. That's a great question. Share some multiple choice questions on project management, please. If anybody wants to write some, please be my guest. I will be happy to share them. I do not have time to write them at the moment. Those courses that I put in the link for the Coursera course and the edX course, those do have some questions in them. And hopefully at some point I will have some time to write up some project management questions, but I do not have it right now. I have papers due for class. So I will have to work on those because the end of semester is coming up soon. If you didn't get a chance to get your question in, please remember the comments will be open, and I hope you have happy studying.